everybody, and happy Friday. I'm super excited to start the weekend off with Mavens of Manufacturing, and we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. And I know that's like a good key word that's going around in our industry lately. Some people who are involved in the industry are a little afraid of it because thank you, Hollywood, for making monsters out of robots and all that other stuff. But I promise you, this conversation is really important, especially for your compliance management. So please join me in welcoming Kristina to Mavens of Manufacturing. Kristina, welcome to Mavens. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm super excited to have you too, because this is actually the 185th episode of Mavens, which is crazy to me because it feels like I just started it yesterday. So super excited that it's still going on 4 years later. And then to anyone tuning in, we do have a comment section. So don't be shy. Feel free to ask questions or make comments down below. If you're tuning in from somewhere around the world, let us know where you're tuning in from, because we got quite a few listeners from around the world, which is awesome. But Kristina, I want to get back to you. Can you tell us, your journey into engineering and manufacturing? Like, was this you're the chief innovation officer, which we'll get more details about later, with Signify. So did you ever think that you were going to be a chief innovation officer when you were trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. No, if the version of me 10 years ago could see where I am, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Yeah, no. So a little bit about me. I've always been a space nerd, and up until coming to Signify, I worked at space companies. So I started like in commercial space when it was really popping off in 2013, when more of these commercial companies were starting to get into, building satellites and actually being able to launch on launch vehicles, right? For so long, it was a government thing. And then commercial space really became something, right? And that was back in 2013. So I never really looked back, right? So I got really lucky to get into a company early on. I was employee number 4. And once you touch and see and feel space hardware, you never really look back, right? I was really lucky to be part of a process from idea to design to actually having hardware on a manufacturing floor and touching it and seeing it, and then seeing it be integrated onto a launch vehicle. So I've always, loved and been attracted to that. And so I've been really lucky to, get to spend a good 10, 11, 12 years of my career doing that. Yeah.
Do you still follow the space industry?
I do. Yeah, very, very closely. And there's a bit of space, right, in what I'm doing today. But I do really still follow it. Yeah, I love that industry, and I love kind of the innovations, and I love to see how much it's grown. I mean, it's incredible, the technology today. It's leaps and bounds from 10 years ago, even.
Yeah, one of my sons just told me they wanted to be an astronaut when they grow up, and it kind of made me very proud, but also very scared at the same time, because it's so vast.
Yeah.
And it's like, you could get lost up there.
Yeah.
There's something I could do about it. So it's really cool that they are asking questions about it and having an interest in it. So I'm curious to see where that's going to go. And then the other one's just obsessed with cars. Like, he can't get enough of cars. So we'll see where that turns out. Yeah. Well, can you tell us how your journey led you into where you're at Signify, and then briefly just explain to us what Signify is, because you guys focus on artificial intelligence, and we can get into this a little later, but artificial intelligence to me is really broad. Like, I am still like, what exactly is it, kind of thing. But tell us how your journey led you to Signify and what you're doing there with that company.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my past, I've always focused on the regulatory and compliance side of space, right? So what I was doing was making sure that our supply chain, we had, the right materials, and dealing with, US government and getting licenses. So I've always been in the compliance world as it related to the work that I was doing in space, right? So I actually met with Martine, who is the CEO of Signify. And this was kind of back when I was still doing that. And we started talking about the workflow, right, for how to manage compliance. And I think it doesn't matter if you're working in space manufacturing or if you're, creating a car. There are these workflows and compliance requirements that these manufacturers have to meet, right? So um, that's kind of what got me excited when we started to talk about Signify was like, hey, we can take these workflows and use AI to make these workflows a lot easier and better and more efficient for manufacturers. And it's to help manufacturers really bring the safest and best, products to market. Um, you know, I'll kind of nerd out from a compliance perspective here for a second, but for the most part, most of us, when we're working with compliance or tracking requirements, or even, dealing with like vendor requirements, still using workbooks and going back and forth and doing all of this manual, frankly, administratively burdensome work, right? And there's definitely a better way. And that's what Signify, where we really want to help. And you brought up AI and kind of like there's this sci-fi, a bubble around it, maybe thanks to Hollywood or just thanks to the perception. But the thing that I love about Signify is we're really pragmatic, right? So as somebody who's a compliance person myself, we realize it's still crucial to have the human in the loop. So while our solution is here to help you navigate that process much more efficiently, um,
Mhm.
the human has to be there, right? So it's not a magic bullet of like everything is good, you're green, you're compliant, don't worry about it. We need the human who understands the operation, who understands the product, the market, the real expert in the craft to still be, very much in the loop, seeing the output of what Signify can bring. Yeah.
So one of the things I want to talk about too, because I do have a younger audience who is kind of discovering what engineering and manufacturing are. And shout out to the junior board of directors in Canada. They watch Mavens pretty frequently. But can we just touch real quick on what compliance actually is and its relation to standards? Because each industry within manufacturing and engineering has a set of standards for different processes and materials and all that stuff. So what exactly is compliance and the importance of it in terms of the things that you're doing at Signify so that we can get them to understand what we're actually talking about here? Because I don't want them to be like, what is compliance?
What is
And
compliance?
yeah, so can
Yeah.
we talk about that for a quick second?
Yeah, and to be super clear, I will say that Signify is, I will call it regulation or standard agnostic, right? So whether you're working with a quality manual or an ISO standard, or you are working with a set of regulation, we can take a corpus of requirements and make that simply. So what is compliance? It can mean a lot of things depending on your industry, right?
Mhm.
So for me in my past, I had to, not only do kind of the quality side of things, the SOPs, how are we inspecting, our supply chain, but also the actual regulations that we had to follow. So export control or FCC requirements, NOAA, commercial remote sensing requirements. There's a whole world of just not only regulation, but standards that you have to, of course, follow to be able to bring your product to market. Um, so that's what I would call kind of the world of compliance, right? And it can mean different things at different companies. So for example, think about like ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, right? Like that's a whole set of different standards and requirements that you have to follow to show that your company is following or adhering to those ESG standards.
Mhm.
And it really depends on your industry, right? But compliance is essentially if you're in life sciences, it's life or death, right? Like if you have a class 3 medical device, how your compliance is set up with the FDA requirements and all of the things you have to do, that's somebody's life on the line, right? So compliance is really ingrained in everything that you're doing, all steps of the way, from an idea or an inception all the way to getting that product, that hardware, whatever it is, out the door.
Mhm.
So I think compliance is driven from not only the regulation, but the standard, or maybe it's even like if you're working with a particular customer, right? Maybe they have requirements on you with respect to like the environment or the levels you're testing to, that can fit into that like requirements bucket as well, or compliance
Mhm.
bucket. Yeah.
So when does the conversation of compliance really happen? Is it at the start of a production, like a design production or a component design? Like how often should companies be really thinking about or having a conversation around compliance?
I mean, as a compliance person, I say have a culture of compliance. And if you have a compliant organization, then it becomes just part of how you operate, right?
Mhm.
I think often compliance gets put into a reactive role where it's like, okay, we've designed something, we've done the R&D, we have the hardware, here it is. Oh, oops, we didn't check that box. We actually need to go get a license to do this, or we can't sell it into this market. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think, that's kind of another piece of what brought me to Signify was I always felt compliance is so crucial to bringing these like quality and safe products to market and giving folks in compliance, right, the ability to be proactive as opposed to reactive and actually have that as part of their, a company's strategic advantage. I think that that's crucial. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, we can talk about things like recalls, right? When you don't have a compliant company, these things can happen, and then you're reacting, and you're what are we going to do, right? It's a scramble.
Yeah.
So
We were talking about that before we went live. I had an issue this morning of a product that I purchased and then digested it. And then I got an email saying that, oh, it might be unsafe for you to use this product. So now I'm in the process of trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with these next steps? I definitely need to make a doctor's appointment and figure out what the ingredients were. So
yeah.
hopefully it was not too dangerous, but yeah, this stuff is important. I do want to pull in Hank. Hank is the dad of the junior board of directors, Peyton and Aiden. So, Hank, thank you for tuning in. Please tell the ladies I said hello, and I hope they're doing well. And then the homesteading Avenger, Steven. Hello. Steven's really cool. He's a beekeeper. So, if you love honey, make sure to reach out to Steven because he makes some really good honey. He actually sent me some, and it was delicious and really liked it. And then David Turner, I don't have any knowledge on this topic. Looking forward to this. Awesome, David. I don't have very much knowledge on it either, and that's why I love these conversations because it helps me get educated about what's going on in our industry. So, with Signify as the Chief Innovations Officer, can you describe to us what that actually is, and then
Yeah.
uh, what a day in the life looks like for you at Signify?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're a pretty small team, right? So I think generally my day to day is wearing any hat that needs to be worn to make sure we get things done.
Are you
Um,
considered a startup?
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So our company just came out of stealth mode in July of last year. Now I almost said this year, but last year. And we were based out of Seattle, and we actually incubated at the AI2 incubator, which is the Paul Allen incubator in Seattle, Washington.
Mhm.
So we, it started as an idea, and then we came out kind of publicly in July. Um, but in terms of a chief innovation officer, which I know is kind of a vague title, with my background in regulatory, a lot of what I'm doing is talking to people in the manufacturing industry almost weekly, if not daily, about the challenges. How is the work to be done getting done today? So that's really
Mhm.
like, how are you actually doing compliance in your day to day? What do you do to make sure that you're following these regulations, or you're following your quality manual? um, and I take that and translate it into what our product is doing. So it's a lot of those conversations, and the other part of what I do is really, with our current customers, working with them, understanding, how is the product working for you? And again, I want to understand their pain points. What are the things that are still coming up, or what's happening? And it's really just turning those into ways our solution can help.
Has there been any really unique challenges that you've encountered so far in your role, and how have you overcome those unique challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think with new technology, and especially with the buzzword of AI, I mean, there's a lot of reluctant people, right? And understandably so. I think um new tech, kind of adapting to the new technology is always scary. And so a lot of these conversations I mentioned, we're talking about, the way things were done versus the way things are going to be done, right? And I think,
Mhm.
like I said earlier, our approach, right? We're so pragmatic about our approach. But it is really talking to these people about, their fears and their problems and the solutions that we can bring. Because if you just say, hey, it's AI, I mean, I think a lot of folks think they're just going to take my job.
Mhm.
But the reality is it's just changing how we work. And I always talk about, like, think about email, right? Like, before we had email, we're writing letters and putting them in the mail and sending them to our customers or vendors. Can you imagine doing that today? I mean, I just think the technology AI, which is a big bucket, but how we use this technology is just fundamentally changing how we work.
So can you give us more specifics on how Signify is really leveraging AI to streamline
Yeah.
compliance for manufacturers? Like, are you using a generative AI platform? Is that what you're considered, or is it something else?
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's what we would consider it.
So
Yeah.
generative AI, I believe, is like what Chat GPT is. So it will
It's
take.
not an agent. Yeah. So it's not like a chat agent. We don't have like it's not that. So let me explain, I'll kind of explain how it works. So um you talk to me, right? And we talk about your product, the market you're in,
Mhm.
kind of the end use, all the information that we can gather about your product, right? And so from there we kind of understand it. And again, we'll, in conversation with you, we'll understand too, what are the standards and requirements that are applicable to your product. So the first kind of value proposition, or the first thing that Signify does, is it takes that huge corpus of requirements, sometimes millions of words, and we can turn that into an AI generated checklist, right? So Signify takes in information about your product, understanding of your market, and then is able to pull kind of what's relevant to you and your product. So that's kind of the first thing, right? I think if you talk to folks in compliance and manufacturing, sometimes it's just, where do you start? There are so many requirements and so many things that could be applicable. So
Mm.
that's kind of the first thing, right? Then the second thing that Signify does is, if you have a document, right? So let's say you want to, I'm familiar with ISO, right? So you have an ISO standard and you want to verify your quality manual, or your SOPs against the standard. Signify does that for you. So it takes those requirements and then takes your documentation. And then the output of that is a conformity assessment showing, okay, these are the requirements that you have. This is where, and an explanation. So these are your requirements. Here's what Signify thinks, whether or not it's compliant, right? And it gives you an explanation and points you to where you need to go check. And again, that's where that very that human in the loop approach is so crucial. Is, obviously the human is the expert, and the human's going to go and check, right, the yes and the no's, and focus in on where they need to focus.
Okay. So in terms of like the manufacturers that you've spoken to and asked questions from, like what are their biggest challenges that they're presenting to you? Because I'm assuming it's going to be a little bit different from industry to industry. Is it a documentation issue? Is it, not having enough workforce in their space? Is it a training issue? Is it a skill issue? Like, what are the main challenges they're facing specific
Yeah.
to the compliance that they have?
Totally. I would say it's mixed, of course. I think one of them is the sheer number of requirements. So if you think about how many requirements that there are, and some of them are similar in different regulations. So it's kind of navigating how many requirements there are, and kind of how do we organize that? Where do we start? I would also say that, generally compliance teams and folks working in compliance, they're always being asked to do more with less. So
Mm.
it's maybe a staffing thing too, right? They just don't have enough people, and it takes a lot of time. It takes so much time to read through those requirements and do the comparison. I can speak from my own experience. Is sometimes that just takes forever. And so that's kind of, again, we want to be that team behind you. We're not trying to replace the compliance folks and the people who know the product and they're the expert, right? That's Signify is meant to give them, be a team. So it's like a team behind you. I also think too, right? Humans get tired. We get tired. It's hard to read through, millions of words, thousands of words and do those gap assessments. So it's, again, just, it's helping you to do that in a more efficient way.
Your comment just made me think of something. So one of the other conversations that has been coming up a lot within our sector is neurodivergent individuals. And if you are someone that has like ADHD, like myself, it's really hard to get through reading things, especially if it's so close together and like it's over 300 words on it's really, really hard and annoying to try to get. And technical documents are just insane sometimes with the information that they have. Yeah. So I do really well with like pictures and videos and stuff, just because my brain can handle it a little bit better than just black and white written text that's way too long. So I think go ahead.
It's an enabler for people who are near, you know what I mean? So it helps kind of simplify at least that part of the process, right? I can see that, Signify and generative AI in general can be an enabler for people who, we all have different ways of operating and thinking and what works for somebody doesn't work for somebody else. I always talked about that in training, right? It's important when you do a training to check the box. You can, throw a manual that's 300 pages at everybody and say, okay, sign the last page and tell me that you read it. And that's good enough. But the reality is, when compliance is crucial to your operation, you have to make sure that everybody from an intern who works for the summer to the CEO knows what's required of them with respect to compliance. And that's how your training should be done, because everybody learns differently. So it's like having multiple sources of that same information. Sure, send the manual for the person who really wants to get in the weeds and read, but also do a 30-minute session Q&A. Give examples from your real job of like, if this happened, what would you do? How would you handle this? And then I would always do like Wikipedia pages, I'd call them, just of like short, if you're interested in this topic, go to this page, and it has kind of all these tips. Again, because people, in companies, you have a lot of diverse processing, right? It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, one of the, I think, other conversations surrounding AI, and this came up in a conversation that I heard last year at a marketing summit. It's right when ChatGPT came out and became really popular, and a lot of marketers were using that to kind of streamline some of their processes in terms of how they were marketing certain products and stuff. And one question was, well, how are you going to handle the legality side of things? So like with standards and compliance, I think there's still this fear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's still some fear that the AI is not going to quite get the detailed information from standards and compliance stuff that's already out there, or it might pull from the wrong source or mix it out. Even if it's like a translation, there might be some gaps there. So from your experience and what the work that you're doing with Signify, are there risks involved with AI for compliance that manufacturers should be aware of that you're working on or you've found a solution for?
Yeah, I think accuracy is so important, and I know that that's a concern totally. And again, I think it's human in the loop, right? Like the system, an AI system doesn't understand your product. And even, think about how the regulation or compliance, right? Those standards, sometimes they can be gray, and sometimes an approach for how you comply might not be this black and white thing. So where Signify can help is on those black and white requirements. You shall have this, and then the thing that Signify is analyzing, does it have it, right? But I really do think like that will get better with time, definitely. But having the human in the loop, having the expert in the loop, right? You still have to do that compliance or that conformity assessment. But it's having a tool to help you do that more efficiently. Again, I just don't think it's not like a magic bullet, right? It's not I think that's what they say, silver bullet. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not like green, go, you click a button and that's no longer a requirement, right? It's definitely important to keep the human in the loop. Yeah.
I think that's with all like advancements in technology, because there is this fear right now that automation, robotics, AI, everything is just going to replace all of the humans. And it's like, no, it's supposed to make our jobs easier. So let's not like stop watching the movies, because
Yeah.
movies are not helping.
Yeah.
I do want to pull Marcos' comment up. He said your interviewees and your show are great. Thank you, Marcos. I appreciate that. If you guys have any questions too for Kristina, feel free to drop them in the comments. There might be some sort of lag because sometimes I don't get all of the comments from the platforms, but if you want to put them in the comments, we can also answer them after the episode too. So don't be shy on your questions. But one of the, I think, hesitations for some manufacturers when they're adapting new technologies, especially technologies from Signify, is they don't really know where to get started or how to get started. So when you're connecting with these companies, what is that process for them? What does it look like? How do they get this integrated into their workflow, and what's the first step for them to get really started on it?
Yeah, I think, the first step is hard, especially when you think about compliance and all the things that can mean. Um, but I think in my conversations, just finding a really goal, like a use case, right? Find a measurable goal to show the value that we can bring. So, for example, if you have a document like a quality manual and you want to run that quality manual against a standard, right? Like that's a measurable goal and you can kind of see the output from there. And then it kind of just it grows from there. I mean, again, the entire universe of compliance is so vast. So I think pick one thing that you can have measurable, like a measurable goal. Like I want to reduce the time it takes to do audit preparation is just an example I'm thinking off the top of my head. See if Signify reduces that time for you. I bet it will. And go from there, right? It grows from there. So I think picking a use case that will actually bring value, and starting small and setting a measurable goal.
So is this something that like would be integrated into a company's like CMS system or ERP system? Like how does this fit within their processes within a company? Like, do they need to have something separate for it?
Right now we're a separate system, but
Okay.
the future will be integration into all of those systems. So an ERP, anything like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I do want to ask you about, the future, especially with Signify. Like, what sort of trends in AI and automation are you most excited about within the manufacturing and engineering space? And, how is Signify really going to pull those in and adapt it to what you're doing with compliance?
I think I'm very excited about what Signify is doing and what we can enable for folks, right?
Mhm.
I think kind of some of the trends I'm watching right now in the manufacturing world, AI powered vision systems. So how those are going to work with respect to like quality control and defects in products, right? I think that's a really cool, advancement that's on its way. Again, right, I think compliance is just, not to, be my compliance nerd here, but it's just so crucial for companies to have a compliant product and using, AI powered technology to kind of help ease that burden and make
Mhm.
that process easier. I'm so excited about that. I'm so excited kind of to see, how things grow in the next year or so. And it's just such a huge part of that. Compliance is such a huge part of the manufacturing process. So I'm
How,
excited to see that.
how do you see it transforming that relationship between manufacturers and the regulatory bodies in the future? So the the organizations that are coming up with these regulations and compliance standards?
I think bringing efficiencies on both sides. You know, it's really about whether you're processing a license, and I can't speak to like the regulatory side, whether or not they're embracing the technology yet. But I think like if you think about that process, so say you have to have a license for something that usually takes time, and there's some antiquated systems that still support those processes for licenses. So I can think of an example. So getting a license to export something out of the United States into another country, right? Like there's this whole process that has to happen on a system, and a person goes and looks over it. So from a, a regulatory body's perspective, I think I'd love to see, and I hope that, there's some embracing of the technology and creating efficiencies so that folks in the market can be efficient as well, right? So sometimes that license is like the thing that a company is waiting for at the very end to be able to bring a product to market or to be able to meet that next milestone in a contract. And I think, in terms of on the company side, right? Like compliance, again, it's so scary if you think about the regulatory bodies who can come in and shut down your operation, or you get a license, or in some cases, like in the case of ITAR or EAR, which are, the regulation in space, you're personally liable for sometimes, right? Depending on the nature of what happens. So again, I think having a system in place to give you that confidence that's always on, always checking, hey, Kristina, this part of your document changed and now you're not in compliant with this requirement. I mean, that's kind of the helps you sleep at night. That Signify.
Yeah.
And so it's about that efficiency. It's about kind of having that system to back you up, that tool to actually back you up. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because I feel like a lot of us who have, driven in a car or flown in an airplane, astronauts who've gone into space on, which I don't understand how they do that, but like there's a lot of things that have to be exactly on point for all of that to be successful. And even if like a failure does happen, that can be corrected mid whatever. Like there's things on airplanes that I didn't learn about until like maybe a few years ago, that if a certain failure happens, there's like a backup system that prevents that failure from continuing forward, and then nobody on the airplane knows about it. It's like, this is really freaky. So it's like it's good to have that cushion for, that confirmation that yes, everything is exactly how it's supposed to be. And I probably would not be very good in compliance, because I would be stressed out so much. Like I'd have to like double check everything, and
you get some sleepless nights for sure. There's some sleepless nights. Yeah.
Very cool job though. But Hank said Peyton says hi, she's homesick. Well, I hope you feel better, Peyton. Thank you for tuning in. And then Frank says great to be here. Thank you, Frank, for coming in. Frank has a really awesome facility in Illinois, and he used to own a tank, but then he sold the tank, and one of my friends got to ride in the tank through the town that he belongs in, and I'm just like, I really wish I had that opportunity to ride in the tank. So fun fact about Frank, he's a good guy. You guys should connect with one another. So one of the things that I like, especially when I know that Peyton is at home sick watching, I really like to talk about, the careers and stuff. So, for anybody that's considering a career in engineering and manufacturing, what sort of advice would you give them? And, what is it about being a chief innovation officer that you really, really like? And maybe you can talk about some of the skills that you need for that specific position to be successful. Because I never knew that was a thing until I got into engineering and manufacturing. I didn't know there was chief innovation officers, and I'm like, what is this? Like, what do you do in this position? So could you give us advice for the next generation and why they should maybe consider chief innovation officer as a possible pathway?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, my title isn't very traditional, but I think general advice, right? engineering and manufacturing to me are the coolest industries that you can be in. It's the place where innovation happens, right? So maybe I'm innovating on the software side of things, but there are hardware and software engineers who are innovating constantly, right? And we're constantly creating new technologies and creating things to make our lives better. And I think it's incredible. For my path, I think I got really lucky finding early on kind of the convergence of what I love, what I was a nerd about, which is space, and a job that I could do in that world, right? So like getting introduced into that world and being able to kind of bring together my passion and a job was incredible to me. And like I said, if you're interested in hardware or you're interested in building and creating, like being able to touch something that is physically going to space is incredible. There's actually, so I worked at a company called Spaceflight a few years back, many years back now, unfortunately, not to age myself. And we had this ring called Sherpa. And I remember being able to actually touch it. I'm in the clean room, of course, following all the rules. I was, of course, in the clean room and following the rules, but actually getting to see it and touch it and feel it. And that went to space. And it was actually one of the first and largest rideshare missions that launched on a Falcon 9 out of Vandenberg in California. It was incredible. I mean, I definitely cried when I saw that go to space because it was my baby and I'd been working on it for so many years. But again, like if you're passionate about that and you want to create and you want to touch and you want to be able to do that regardless of the industry, it can be space, it can be aerospace, it can be vehicles, it can be life sciences, devices, like anything like that. I mean, do it. I think it's incredible, and I'm in awe of the technology and the products that the folks, our customers, they work on every day. And in terms of chief innovation officer, right? I think what I'm doing and my purpose here is to enable and help those companies with those products make their compliance processes easier, better, more efficient, and give those compliance individuals, time to focus on the big things, the things that are out of compliance. So they're not scrambling, so they can sleep at night. So they have that backing, so they have more time. And that's what I'm truly passionate about now is just enabling and helping and giving a solution to folks in those industries. Because it can be burdensome. It's a lot. It can be a lot to do all of the different compliance requirements that you have to meet.
What do you think is like your main superpower, main skill set that's helped you with your success?
I'd say I'm pretty tenacious. There's nothing that I won't try to learn. And I think for me, especially working in compliance and regulatory, you have to know the technology that your engineer and your team is working on. So you have to be a partner to your manufacturing team, your engineering team. Otherwise, you're not talking, right? Like there's a disconnect. So in order for me to be able to, make sure that we're compliant and we're following all the rules we had to follow, I had to understand the technology that we were building. So I think always go into these environments with this learning mindset and know that you're not going to be able, like I know that I can't go and start coding, and I know that I can't go and build a satellite, right? But I understand the technology. I understand what's happening enough so to be able to say, okay, well, we're at this step in the process. Where should we be from a compliance perspective? Because my job is to enable, right? So I think that that's what translates from my past is I always saw my job as an enabler to get these amazing ideas out the door, right? And so that's what I'm doing on a much grander scale here at Signify, I feel, right? Is enabling teams to be able to get their products out the door, giving them efficiencies. So I think, yeah, tenacity, learning, right? Come in with a learning mindset. Just be willing to learn and understand that side.
Yeah, definitely build a great rapport too with the engineers because they are just full of information. And once you get them to start talking, it's just amazing how complex their brains are and the information that they just, I don't know how engineers sleep because it's like their minds are always going and just filled with ideas. They're always looking at something a little bit differently than the rest of us, and like, how can I make that better? Like it's fun to be around them, and when you get them to in their teacher mode, it's great conversations to have.
Yeah.
Looking back on your career, Kristina, is there a piece of advice you wished someone had given you earlier? And if so, what was that piece of advice you wish you had earlier?
That's a great question. I think it can be hard, right, to break into a new industry, and especially if it's, STEM, right, or engineering or manufacturing, it can be hard to break into that.
Mhm.
I think stick with your passion, stick with your goals, take a bet on yourself, right? Like just get in there and learn. And not everybody has a traditional path, right, to something. And I will say for myself, especially, I wasn't the person who, graduated high school and went right to college. So I definitely had kind of a working, and then I went back to school, and then I came back and I really kind of figured out where I wanted to go. I think it's okay early on to not have things figured out, and you can try something. And if you don't, if it's not quite the right fit, you can translate that into something else. There's no, like specific path to getting to where you want to be. Um, and yeah, I think just always take a bet on yourself, I guess, is the bet my favorite little tidbit of advice. Trust yourself, and just go for your passion and work in something that you to the extent that you can, that you love, an industry that
Yeah.
you love.
I really like that advice because I feel like for some, I see a shift happening where it's not happening so much now, but I feel like for a time there was this belief that once you picked something and started in it, you had to stick with it and settle with it,
Yeah.
even if you were like happy with it or not. And it's like, no, you can change your mind at any time you want, as long as you're not dead. Just keep doing the things that make you happy. And I've met women who were in their 50s that were like, I'm done with this. I can't do it anymore. I'm going to switch. And they did something else. And I feel like age is kind of something that hinders people because they think, oh, I'm just too old, or nobody's going to hire me, or nobody is going to want my skill set. And it's like, no, that's not the case
No,
at all. Like, keep going. Someone will pick up on your energy and your vibe and your knowledge. So keep going.
absolutely.
I do want to ask you, Kristina, like, for anyone who has any questions for you or they want to learn more about Signify, I wish we would have like scheduled a demo with you, because I feel like
Yeah.
it's better for people to see how your platform works. Maybe we can do that at a later date. But if anybody wants a demo of Signify and how they can apply it to their compliance management, what is the best way to get a hold of you, and where should they go for that information?
Great. Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get in touch with me. Or you can just email me directly. And my email is really easy. It's my first name, Kristina, at getsignify.com. And it's spelled kind of the way that you can see there in the title, but it's Signify.
Awesome. And are there going to be any trade shows this year or events that you're going to be exhibiting at or speaking at that people can meet you in person if they're in the area?
Yeah, TBA. We'll put those out there soon. We're working on kind of figuring out where we're going to be. Yeah. But I'd love to meet people and talk to folks. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, Kristina, I do want to give you an opportunity to ask our audience a question. So if you had one ask for our audience, what would that be?
Let's see. I One of the asks I have, and it's to think about the workflows that you have today, right? And to the extent that you're touching compliance or following a standard, or whatever that might be, or maybe you're even like in supply chain and you're doing vendor diligence. What are the workflows and processes that you have today that you think could become more efficient if you had a magic wand, or you could apply AI? What are those workflows, and what are those um, things, those steps that you take that you think you could make more efficient?
Awesome. Well, Kristina, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to sit with me and chat for a bit on Mavens of Manufacturing. I really appreciate it. This was a great
Thank
conversation,
you.
and I'm super excited to see how Signify continues to grow. I just think startup companies are awesome to work with, and they're a lot of fun because, you know, they're still getting into the sector, but and they have a lot of grit and resilience too. So it's just good to see people expand. And AI is such a big topic of conversation. So I know that you guys are going to be successful because it's important and a lot of people need to start adapting it. So thank you so much for sharing your story. To anyone tuning in, be sure to reach out to Kristina if you have any more questions. You can also drop them in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to send them to her if she can't answer them online. I will have an email, her email address, and her contact information in the Signify website, in a news article that I will be writing and hopefully getting out today or on Monday. So one of the new things I'm doing this year is writing news articles with each episode, and it will be like my show notes. I know I did a horrible job with that in previous years, but we're going to get better this year. So new year, new things happening. For anyone who has merchandise, if you want to spice up your brand, please stay tuned. I do have a sponsor coming up from Fresh Horizons. They do all of Mavens merch. They're a family-owned business. They're really awesome, and they take good care of you and have fun and creative ways to display your merchandise. So be sure to stay tuned, and I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
This episode of Mavens has been sponsored by Fresh Horizons Group. Fresh Horizons Group is a family-run company that was founded on the premise of helping organizations and businesses better tell their story through high-quality branded apparel and promotional items. Freshen up your brand by contacting Fresh Horizons today at freshhorizonsgroup.com.